In the cold void between stars, where the light of the Astronomicon grows dim and the warp currents run strange and treacherous, there are places the Imperium has forgotten, worlds that vanished in ages past, swallowed by warp storms or lost to the slow decay of records and memory. Most are gone forever, their populations dead or transformed into something no longer human. But sometimes, after centuries or millennia, these lost worlds return. And when they do, they bring horrors with them. This is the story of Chaeroneia and of Justicar Alaric's battle against the heresy of the Dark Mechanicus. Our tale begins on Deep Orbit Monitoring Station, Trinary 91, a corroded metal sphere about 500 meters across, drifting in the emptiness of the Borosis system. It was staffed by only 3 souls, 2 Imperial functionaries named Argyll and Surus, whose primary occupation was playing regicide to pass the endless months of their posting, and an astropath called Lacrima, a blind telepath whose shriveled form rarely emerged from her quarters. For 3 months they had done nothing but maintain the station's temperamental machine spirit and wait for their 9-month shift to end. The Borosis system was a backwater, unremarkable in every way, with nothing to report and nothing to fear. They were wrong. The proximity alarms began to sound first, followed by the gravitational sensors, then the radiation detectors. Surus thought it was a malfunction, the station's systems acting up again. But Argyll saw Lacrima stumbling down the corridor toward them, her hands reaching blindly ahead, her hood fallen back to reveal her wrinkled scalp and the white band she wore across her empty eye sockets. "No," she gasped, her voice shrill and piercing. "I can see them, I can hear them, all around." It wasn't a fault. It was real. Astropaths were always the first to know when something truly terrible was about to happen. Lacrima pulled the bandage from her eyes, revealing empty bone inscribed with prayer symbols that burned a faint orange, as if a great heat were trying to escape from behind them. "Charles," she said. "The Castigator." The station shook as something struck it. Through the flickering pic screens, they saw what should have been impossible, a point of red light gathering in space, the stars around it smearing as their light was bent by the anomaly. It was growing, flaring out a white-hot corona as something massive forced its way into reality. A planet was emerging from the warp. A planet that had no business existing in the Borosis system. Lacrima sent a desperate astropathic message, pouring every symbol of doom she knew into the transmission. The beast, the heretic. The worst signs from the Imperial Tarot, images of cities made of hatred and a cannibal world. She transmitted visions of planets and stars rearranged according to some terrible plan, of daemons and corruption on a scale that defied comprehension. She did not know if anyone would receive it. She did not know if anyone would understand. But somewhere in the vastness of the Imperium, her message found its way to those who hunted the demonic. The message reached Inquisitor Nixos of the Ordo Malleus aboard the Imperial cruiser Tribunicia, commanded by Rear Admiral Horsgeld. Nixos was ancient and withered, his frail body sustained by an exoskeleton of silver-plated brackets and servos that lent him inhuman strength and speed. His large, filmy grey eyes seemed to look straight through anyone he addressed, as if searching for hidden corruption. He had worked with Justicar Alaric before, during the hunt for the Daemon Prince Gargatuloth on Volcanis Ultor, and he knew that when astropaths began screaming about worlds emerging from the warp, the Grey Knights would be needed. Alaric received the summons on Titan, where he had been recovering from that very battle. The wounds he had sustained fighting Gargatuloth had healed, but the memories remained fresh, the terrible pillar of iridescent flesh that had been the Daemon Prince, the faces writhing beneath its skin, the moment when he had spoken the true name and felt his lips burn with each syllable. His squad had been rebuilt with new brothers to replace those who had fallen. Brother Lycos still carried the Psycanon, and Brother Archis was their new apothecary. Brothers Holvarn and Devorn had survived Volcanis Ultor alongside Alaric, and their bond was stronger for the ordeal they had shared. When Nixos' message arrived, Alaric assembled his men and prepared for deployment. He did not know what awaited them in the Borosis system, but he knew it would test them. The Grey Knights existed for such tests. The Tribunicia translated into the Borosis system to find a scene of devastation. The star itself had been transformed, its healthy yellow light corrupted into a swollen, livid red streaked with angry black sunspots. Its corona bled off into a halo of sickly light that bathed the entire system in a color that seemed somehow diseased. The planets that orbited it were dying. Borosis Prime had become even more barren than the burning globe of rock it had been before, and Borosis Secundus had lost its atmosphere entirely, the sudden temperature change throwing its gaseous layers into such turmoil that they bled off into space. Borosis Cerulean, the most inhabited world with 7 major colonies and 1.5 billion souls, was cold and dark. Its cities might provide shelter from the eternal winter that had fallen over the world, but their power and supplies would not last forever. The evacuation of such a population would be a monumental undertaking, but that was not the Ordo Malleus's concern. They had come for something else entirely. At the edge of the system, where there had been nothing but empty void, hung the impossible 7th planet. It was deep charcoal grey, streaked with black, studded with thousands of tiny lights that spoke of habitation. Around it swarmed thousands upon thousands of asteroids, like a cloud of insects protecting their hive. Even from orbit, Alaric could feel the wrongness pulsating from the world. It was like the echo of a scream, a smell of old death, a slick and unhealthy feeling against his soul. His psychic wards, the hexagrammic and pentagrammic symbols tattooed into his flesh and woven into his armor, grew warm in response to the corruption below. All Grey Knights were psychic to some degree. They had to be for their minds to be so effectively shielded against corruption. Alaric's powers were all internalized, focused around the wards that kept his mind safe, but he could still feel the demonic presence saturating the planet like a stain. The world was identified as Chaeroneia, a forge world of the Adeptus Mechanicus that had disappeared into a localized warp storm over a century ago. The Mechanicus had sent an investigation team before the disappearance, following rumors of improper practices and tech-heresy. No reports had ever been received. Now the world had returned, and whatever had happened during its time in the warp had clearly changed it beyond recognition. Accompanying the Grey Knights was Archmagos Saphentis, a senior tech priest sent by Mars to investigate what had become of their lost forge world. Saphentis was more machine than man, his body a collection of augmetic limbs and sensor arrays mounted on a hunched insectoid frame. His face was a mask of polished bronze with large compound eyes, and he spoke in the clicking machine code of lingua technis when addressing his subordinates. He had brought with him tech priest Thalassa, a young adept whose face was covered in silvered circuitry, and a unit of 20 tech guard soldiers in full-face helmets with polished brass visors. Alaric did not entirely trust Saphentis. The Mechanicus kept secrets, even from the Inquisition, and Alaric suspected there was more to this mission than a simple investigation. But the Grey Knights needed the tech priest's expertise if they were to understand what had corrupted Chaeroneia. Also present was Interrogator Hawkspur, Nixos's most capable field agent. She was a hard woman, scarred by years of hunting heretics, her body marked by tumors that were the price of her exposure to the corrupting influence of chaos. The growths were visible under the skin of her throat, blue-grey lumps that would eventually constrict her breathing. But she had years left, and she intended to spend them in service to the Emperor. The descent to Chaeroneia was brutal. The asteroids that surrounded the planet were not natural formations but controlled weapons, detecting the landing craft and hurling themselves at it as it plunged through the atmosphere. The ship's forward guns blasted them apart, but fragments spattered against the hull like gunfire. Then something massive struck the ship head-on, a catastrophic impact that sheared away the cockpit and killed the servitor pilots instantly. The craft tumbled, completely out of control, its engines spurting to correct a trajectory that could not be corrected. Through the cracked viewport, Alaric could see a city below them, a massive dark spider straddling the scorched black landscape, its spires reaching up toward the falling craft like grasping fingers. "I am the hammer," said Brother Devon, beginning the prayer. "I am the point of his spear. I am the gauntlet about his fist." The other Grey Knights responded, their voices calm despite the doom rushing toward them. The craft smashed into the first spires of the city, and Alaric's consciousness was torn away by the impact. He awoke in the ruins of Manufactorium Noctis, one of Chaeroneia's great industrial cities. The architecture was wrong, twisted in ways that hurt the eye to look upon. Spires of corroded metal reached toward a sky choked with pollution, connected by webs of walkways and bridges that seemed to have grown rather than been built. Some were wrought in the brutal architecture of the city's original creators, but others were biological, like webs spun by enormous spiders. Veins as thick as train tunnels reached up from the depths to strangle the buildings, pulsing with whatever foul ichor served as the city's lifeblood. The air was thick with the stench of decay and burning chemicals. Strange geometric shapes were projected onto the clouds from far below, an endless holy litany in symbols that Alaric did not recognize. The heartbeat of the city thudded through the ground, the cycle of life and death that kept this cannibal world alive. The tech priests of Chaeroneia had not simply survived their time in the warp. They had been transformed by it. embracing the corruption of chaos, while convincing themselves they were serving the machine god. They called themselves the Dark Mechanicus, and they worshipped something they believed to be the Omnissiah himself, an entity called the Castigator. Alaric learned the truth from an unlikely source. Magos Antigonus had been part of the original investigation team sent by Mars, and he had survived the Century of Madness by hiding in the depths of the Undercity. He was barely recognizable as human anymore, his body a patchwork of salvaged augmetics and jury-rigged repairs. He had been forced to shoot off his own leg to purge a machine curse that had infected his systems, and his bionic eye had been destroyed by a servitor he had thought was safe. But his mind remained loyal to the true machine god, and he had gathered a small band of followers who had resisted the corruption. In the cramped warrens beneath the city, surrounded by menials and refugees who had somehow maintained their sanity, Antigonus explained what had happened to Chaeroneia. When the Forge World was pulled into the warp, the tech priests had been forced to adapt or die. The dimension of nightmares had no mercy for the unprepared, and the predators that swam its currents would have torn the planet apart. So the tech priests had bargained with the powers of chaos, trading their souls for survival. They had learned to fuse daemon and machine, creating servitors possessed by warp entities and war machines powered by captured souls. And in the depths of the warp, they had found something else, an ancient construct, a relic from the age of technology that predated even the Imperium. They called it the Castigator, and they believed it was an avatar of the Omnissiah. The Castigator was a standard template construct, one of the legendary repositories of knowledge from humanity's golden age. Such devices were beyond precious to the Adeptus Mechanicus. A single working STC could revolutionize Imperial technology. But this one was different. It had been corrupted during its millennia in the warp, infused with demonic intelligence. It had taught the tech priests of Chaeroneia the arts of tech sorcery, shown them how to create machines that should not exist, and promised them power beyond anything the Imperium could offer. In return, they worshipped it as a god. Now Chaeroneia had returned to real space, and the Castigator was broadcasting a signal across the galaxy. It was a tribute, Antigonus explained, an offering to Abaddon the Despoiler and his Black Crusade. The Dark Mechanicus had built an army of corrupted titans in the Titan Works on the outskirts of the city, war machines fused with demonic essence, and they were offering them to the forces of chaos. The implications were staggering. If Abaddon gained access to such an army, the war at the Eye of Terror would be lost. Cadia would fall, and the Imperium would be torn apart. Alaric knew what had to be done. The Castigator had to be destroyed, no matter the cost. While Alaric fought his way through the Undercity, a Chaos fleet arrived in the Borosis system. It was led by the Hellforger, one of the most notorious ships of the Gothic War, commanded by the Chaos Lord Urquithos. The Hellforger was a massive wedge of a ship, bigger than the Tribunicia and sporting twice as many guns, its hull covered in blisters and weeping sores as if the metal itself were diseased. With it came a bloated gun cruiser and a triangular fighter platform bristling with launch bays. Rear Admiral Horsgeld fought desperately to hold them off, but the Hellforger was built for ramming and boarding, and it came straight for the Tribunicia with suicidal speed. The impact was catastrophic. The Chaos ship's prow had been modified into a cutting edge of bone-white fangs, and it carved deep into the Imperial cruiser's hull. Boarding troops poured through the breach, brutal, half-mad creatures evolved for close-quarters killing, flooding the decks with blood-crazed madmen. Horsgeld died on his own bridge, beaten to death by Urquithos himself after refusing to reveal what he knew about the Castigator. He died cursing the traitor with his last breath. On the planet below, Alaric led his surviving forces toward the Titan Works. They fought through data fortresses where daemon-possessed programs manifested as serpentine horrors, their half-real forms swimming through the crystal walls. Brother Archis fell there, reciting the parable of Ganelon to focus the Grey Knights' faith into a weapon that burned the daemons. His voice never faltered, even as the creatures tore at him, and his death bought time for the others to escape. Archmagos Saphentis extracted the information they needed from the data fortress, the location of the Castigator, the layout of the Titan Works, the weakness they would need to exploit. Alaric had suspected Saphentis of treachery, of secret loyalty to the Dark Mechanicus, but the Archmagos proved his faith in the end. When they finally reached the Titan Works, Saphentis faced Skrakos, the leader of Chaeroneia's corrupted tech priests, in single combat. Skrakos was more machine than man, his body a masterwork of the Dark Mechanicus's biological heresies. His hands had been replaced with metallic fronds that crackled with electricity, and mechadendrites writhed from his back like serpents. He was faster and stronger than Saphentis, his ancient augmetics outclassed by the corrupted technology that had been developing for a century in the warp. But Saphentis did not need to win. He only needed to hold on long enough for Antigonus to act. Magos Antigonus had transferred his consciousness into one of the corrupted Warhound Titans, overriding its demonic machine spirit through sheer force of will. As Saphentis grappled with Skrakos, holding the Dark Mechanicus leader in place despite the mechadendrites tearing through his body, Antigonus brought the Warhound's massive foot down. The impact crushed both tech-priests, ending Skrakos' heresy and Saphentis' sacrifice in the same moment. Antigonus felt a hot pang of regret that it had not been him down there, giving his life instead of accepting another's. But there was no time for mourning. The Castigator was rising. It emerged from a vault deep beneath the Titan works, a shape so massive it made the other Titans look like children's toys. It was fully twice the height of a Warhound, bigger even than the legendary Imperator-class war machines. Its form was humanoid but elegant, with a high curved collar of armor and a featureless face dominated by two burning green eyes that dripped fire like tears. Its skin was a strange pearlescent white that wept moisture, and it moved with a grace that seemed impossible for something so massive. In one hand it carried a multi-barreled cannon larger than a building. In the other, a fist crackling with energy fields, and from within its massive chest came a signal that was being broadcast across the galaxy, a promise of tribute to the forces of chaos. Alaric knew he could not defeat such a thing with storm bolters and halberds, but he also knew that the Castigator, for all its power, had a weakness. It was a daemon, whether it knew it or not, and daemons could be fought with more than just weapons. Antigonus carried Alaric toward the Castigator on his Warhound, while brothers Holvan and Devorn climbed toward the massive Titan's reactor. The Castigator's guns tore through the Warhound, sending it crashing to the ground in flames. Alaric was thrown clear, his armor scorched and his body broken, but he was still alive. The Castigator descended from its massive body to confront him directly. It took on a humanoid form, 12 feet tall, its white skin beginning to show the marks of demonic corruption, bulging veins of grey, eyes sinking into scorched sockets, claws growing from its fingers. It spoke to Alaric in a voice that was both mechanical and somehow alive, a chorus of binary code that resolved itself into words. It explained its history, its purpose, its transformation. It had been created to preserve knowledge, to ensure that humanity's greatest achievements would never be lost. But during its millennia in the warp, it had learned new things. It had bargained with the chaos gods, traded information for power, become something more than a mere repository. "I have seen the planets and stars rearranged according to his plan," the Castigator said. "I have taught the truth of the Omnisia to the tech-priests of this world. I have promised tribute to the forces that will remake the galaxy. And yet there is one thing I do not understand. I do not know what I am," Alaric told it. "You bargain with the powers of the warp. You teach sorcery to your followers. You are worshipped as a god. You rule through deceit. You lust for death and destruction. And you have pledged yourself to the service of chaos. All this is true, Space Marine. Well, where I come from, there's a word for something like that. And it is daemon." The word struck the Castigator like a physical blow. It had spent 1,000 years in the warp without ever understanding what it had become, but Alaric's words forced it to see itself clearly, and in that moment of recognition, its nature changed. The white skin became grey and corrupted. The green eyes grew darker, leaking greasy smoke. The elegant form twisted into the half-flesh, half-magic stuff of daemons. "Yes," the Castigator said, savage joy flaring in its eyes. "A daemon am I. Thank you, Justicar. At last I am complete." "You're welcome," said Alaric. "And now you die." The final battle was fought beneath the shadow of the Castigator's massive Titan, as the Hellforger descended through the atmosphere to claim its prize. Alaric faced the daemon with nothing but his faith and his halberd, trading blows with a creature that could have destroyed him with a thought. But Alaric had fought daemons before. He had faced Gargatuloth, the Prince of 1,000 Faces, and survived. He knew that daemons, for all their power, were vulnerable to one thing above all else, the focused hatred of a Grey Knight. He let the rage consume him. He felt the deaths of his battle brothers, of Archis and Lycos and Archmagos Saphentis. He felt Hawkspur's savage wound and the breaking of Thalassa's spirit. The suffering of Chaeroneia, its people torn into the warp and consumed by darkness. He welded them all into a spike of hatred that he drove into the Castigator's corrupted soul. The daemon reeled. Alaric pressed his advantage, punching and slashing and stabbing. When the Castigator tried to flee into the air, Alaric impaled it on his halberd and dragged it back to earth. When it spawned new limbs and claws, he cut them away. When it tried to consume him in its corrupted mass, he tore his way through from the inside. Above them, the Castigator's massive titan began to die. Hulvan and Devorn had sabotaged its reactor, and plasma fire was boiling through its body. The great machine collapsed in on itself, its elegant form melting into slag, its green eyes going dark forever. In the end, Alaric stood over the broken form of the Castigator, his halberd raised. "You should have picked an enemy," he said, "with less imagination." He swung the halberd and sliced off the Castigator's head. The death scream was deafening, a howl of binary code that tore across every frequency. Pure information exploded from the Castigator's ruined body, visions of endless legions of titans marching on the Imperial Palace, destruction so absolute the stars themselves burned out. Then they were gone, and the army of corrupted titans fell silent, their demonic spirits banished back to the warp. The Chaos Fleet withdrew, their prize denied. Abaddon would not receive his army. The Black Crusade would continue without the tribute of Chaeroneia. In the aftermath, Alaric surveyed what remained. Too many had died, but the immediate threat was ended, and that was what mattered. Chaeroneia would be purged, its corruption cleansed by fire if necessary. The Dark Mechanicus would trouble the Imperium no more. Magos Antigonus stood with Alaric at the end, his salvaged body held together by little more than faith. He had spent 100 years fighting the heresy of his own order. Now his vigil was over. "The Omnisire sustained me," he said. "I knew someone would come." Alaric nodded. Faith came in many forms. Antigonus had held to his through a century of darkness, and his faith had been rewarded. The Grey Knights returned to their ship to begin the long journey back to Titan. The battle was over, but the war continued. It always would. But for now, there was time to remember the fallen and give thanks for victory. The Emperor protects, and sometimes, through the faith and fury of his servants, he prevails. May you rest well, knowing such warriors stand vigilant. May the silence of the void embrace you, and may the Emperor's light guide your dreams, as it guides the blades of those who fight in his name.